Welcome to Real Grace, Real Truth with Mitch Knight Pineo, exploring the genuine grace of God and the timeless truths of the Bible. And now, here's Mitch.
Welcome again to Real Grace, Real Truth. Now, this is the last part of Why Grace and Truth. In part 2, we ended with John 3:16 and 17. Let's look at it again. God's truth will always bring us to God's grace. And this passage is one of the clearest verses that reveals the truth about grace. It says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. Now, this passage is the truth, and anyone willing to believe it can receive the grace that comes with it. They can receive the everlasting life of God. They can be saved from death. But without this truth, you cannot have this grace. And unfortunately, there are people who have heard this truth and they have rejected it. There are a number of reasons some people reject the truth, not only about Jesus, but other things as well. Just a few verses later, in John 3:19 and 20, we are given insight into some of those reasons. Now, as I read this, keep in mind that light can be used as a synonym for truth. It says, "Light has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. For everyone practicing evil hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed." This may not describe everyone's situation exactly. They may not be practicing hate, but there's often something a person is not willing to give up. There's something they're holding on to that is keeping them from embracing the truth. Then again, there are haters out there. They're coming to the surface all over the place. You see, the darkness in our world is bringing out the true condition of their heart. Truth brings grace, but not everyone cares about the truth, nor do they want it. Now, every time you reject the truth about anything to do with God, you reject some aspect of his grace. God's grace comes from God's truth. We cannot separate real grace from real truth. Now, I've lived long enough to know that the idea of grace has left many people with a lot of negative emotions. Jude verse 4 in the New Living Translation says, "Some ungodly people have wormed their way into your churches, saying that God's marvelous grace allows us to live immoral lives." You see, there have always been people who do selfish things. Just because there are people who misuse the message of grace and even use it for a license to sin, it doesn't mean that God's grace isn't real. So don't run for the hills just because I use the word grace. When grace and truth are kept together, good things happen. There is real grace and there is real truth. And grace has already been a done deal. Ephesians 3:2 says, if indeed you have heard the dispensation of the grace of God." You see, the grace of God has already been dispensed. Now it's about knowing the truth that counts. The contemporary English version of the Bible says this in Acts 20, verse 32. "Remember the message about his gift of undeserved grace. This message can help you and give you what belongs to you." This is why we need to get a really good grip on truth. So on my next program, I will be starting a series on truth. Because in our world, the truth about the truth can be hard to find. That's why I wrote a book titled The Truth About the Truth. I recommend getting the book Every time I read it, it blesses me, and I've read it many times. Not to mention, I wrote it. You can get your copy at wisdomtreebookpublishing.com. That's wisdomtreebookpublishing.com. So, what is truth? Does it exist? Who decides? Is truth determined by the majority? Do we vote it in? Can you have your truth and I have mine? Or is truth independent of our opinion? We will talk about it next time. My name is Mitch Knight Pinio, and this is Real Grace, Real Truth.